everybody. Welcome to VOXOLOGY podcast. We're so delighted that you would tune in. And this is the 501st episode officially. As we discussed, we're not counting anymore, but man, the 501st Legion of Stormtroopers has a really significant role in Star Wars. And so the 501st VOXOLOGY podcast feels like it's a big deal too. Right. So today we have some lamenting to do.
Second Star Wars reference of the day they'll get the other one a little bit later.
They will get the other one. We have a interview today with an historian named Dr. Malcolm Foley, and he was on the Holy Post. But I got a copy of his book called The Anti-Greed Gospel, and oh man, is that thing dog-eared. Wow. And our conversation, he is a delightful person. I mean, just incredible smile, laughter, but the things he's saying are really significant these days. And as Tim kind of points out in the interview, they're super ripe because we get into DEI stuff and just all the things that are happening around these sorts of conversations about race and greed and it's really, man, I was super there's one big point that he makes that I just had never occurred. And, I hate that I'm learning this
There's
stuff.
other little things like what I was thinking about that we didn't talk about in there. So I'm just going to ask you.
Oh, yeah.
But in talking about the full, but some of what we talk about harkens into the To Be Human series and models of the garden that we're trying to get back to. It was hard not to think about Eden in the garden during the conversation of just like, what did that structure look like? And what happened after they left the garden? Like,
well, you know what, Tim? Secretly, you don't know this, but we're going to go back.
Oh,
we're going to go back into humanness
because we got
Nephilim, we've got flood, we've got cities, Cain. So we're not done. We're not done, Tim. We're still working out how to be human. And then you get the very beginnings of institutional sin and fallenness and all the things.
Well, it's just also interesting in this conversation about greed when you come from a place where everything was there.
Yeah,
right? Like
you didn't have to farm.
Everything was set up, and then the downfall of that, or the fallout, I should say, of that of leaving there. It was immediately like division and greed and
that's right.
Like
Scarcity.
all that stuff. Yeah, it's a very interesting. The other thing I was thinking too is like, is churches having a nonprofit status anti-Christ?
Whoa! What?
But as we're talking through like greed and capitalism and all these different things, that popped in my head too while we were talking.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a title for some future book or episode. Good Lord. Oh, anyhow. Timothy. Yeah. So it's a great interview. Unfortunately, we're not going to start it right now because we've got some stuff to lament happening in the world. Boy. Tim has been added to group chats galore on Signal. And so he's got some eyewitness reporting. He's got some eyewitness reporting. And one of the pushbacks we get every now and again when we talk specifically about the current administration is, hey, were you guys complaining about Biden? And I want to reiterate for the 4,000th time that in the kingdom of God, opposition to one party does not mean support of the other. It's actually possible to approve and disapprove of parts of each. So this is not like full-throated support of every Democratic leader or policy or whatever. But not only that, and again, this is the thing that just bugs me, is that this current administration claims to be operating under divine sanction, divine blessing, that Trump was saved so that he could do this. And, even I saw a Daily Beast article on Pete Hegseth, I guess, our Secretary of Defense, saying, Pete Hegseth, a born-again Christian, I'm not making a judgment about whether or not he is or not. It's just, here's how he is perceived by the world at large. And when when we have political people in political positions operating in manners that are not congruent with Jesus' ways of living, then it feels incumbent upon others to sort of point those things out. So, for instance, the absolute lie fest that was this leak. Great. I'm all for dumbassery. Tim and I engage in dumbassery all the time.
Maybe not on a national security level, but
maybe not when we're bombing people, but my jokes have bombed. So for sure that I've added Tim to chats that he has no business being added to. I don't remember any specifically, but I'm sure I have.
I'm sure they're there.
And so I'm all for dumbassery. That's fine. We all make mistakes, whatevs. But the deliberate, the persistent, and the relentless lying in the face of like very clear evidence to the contrary is and I'm sure everyone has lied, but in an administration claiming divine blessing, I just got to say, I really have a problem with that. I will not. Part of what I think the role of the church is just to tell the truth about things and to poke holes in the ideologies and claims of government now. And one of the holes is this was a pretty big screw up. And if we're unwilling to admit screw ups at a very significant scale, but like in terms of like catastrophic, I'm sure there are much bigger things out there that could have been revealed. If we're willing to just sort of dodge all of that with no accountability or whatever, then I think no matter if the government claims divine blessing, we have to just simply say, no, this is not how Christ works. This is not how human beings are to work. This is not for the public good or for public flourishing. Of course,
it is an interesting time though for speaking out against things, because this administration is becoming more and more,
they're not a fan of.
They're prosecuting and coming after folks more and more for just speaking out. There's been more and more things that have been popping up. So it's just a really weird time where they're pushing all the limits, and I think that's the point. And it relates to this conversation with Malcolm quite a bit too, of just how people try to take power, have power, and lord power over. I mean, it's a tale as old as time. But it's really on display in some pretty nefarious ways right now. Public ways.
I try to wait until I see a news item from multiple different sources before I react or name it or mention it. But like this young woman who wrote an op-ed being pulled off a street seems to be a very legitimate thing. This poor man that was sent to El Salvador for no other reason than he had maybe a wrong tattoo or something. I mean, you're just like, and I'm sure we've made mistakes before, but what seems to be new is this authoritarian push. Like it's the cartoon you sent me. Now that AI has been updated or whatever, we can animate all of these famous pictures. And the White House sends a picture out of a white male police officer handcuffing a person of color as they're weeping and just celebrating, obviously, that we're deporting all of these people. And you can be a fan of saying, hey, we shouldn't have illegal people in here. There's ways to come legally and we should deport them. But the dehumanizing of illegal immigrants, that's where we do have to draw a line and begin to say something. I don't have a great opinion on what we should do politically, but I have a very strong opinion on, are these people made in the image of God? And should a government claiming divine blessing be celebrating the detention, the punishment, even standing before I don't know her name, but she was standing before this El Salvadoran prison. Maybe it was a recording or something with a Rolex watch. And it's just like, good Lord. Oh,
it's not a lot of the things are not, some of them are definitely what is being done, but some of it is how it's being done. And
totally.
And there are so
cruelty is the point in some ways, it seems like. And again, you may be sitting there thinking, hey, this is way too political, guys. Hey, this is stay out of partisan politics. And I think we would argue this isn't partisan politics. This is one of the fundamental roles of the church is to combat ideologies that claim divine blessing. And this is an ideology that has claimed for itself divine blessing. And it's like, nope. If it's going to call itself Christian, then let's let it be Christian.
Yeah.
It's all we're doing is trying to hold up to its own words what the implications of those words are.
Yeah, and it's the same thing as the system or the roots and causes or roots and symptoms conversation for me in a lot of ways. Like it was hard not to in reading these articles and even this conversation with Malcolm that you're about to hear. It's hard. I was thinking about Malala, and we've talked about this before, but when she was talking about how that the Pashtun culture that she's from can be a revenge culture, and that they're combating against that, trying to rewrite some of those narratives. And she said that she thinks that the best form of revenge is forgiveness, and how like the kid that shot her, and we've talked about this, I'll breeze through it quickly, but that, you know, he had been raised and radicalized to think that she was evil. He thought he was doing good.
Yeah.
And to just go tit for tat back and forth with that just perpetuates violence and perpetuates that type of ideology. Whereas trying to pull that ideology out at the roots and to love people and forgive people and try to change the conversation rather than react to the conversation is such a more powerful and I think Christ-centered way of doing things. Like we have to.
Yep.
Humans have been formed by something, and so they have to be reformed. They have to be transformed. Like it can't just be
come on
deformed.
Look at go.
Well, it seems common sense, and you know the little conversation we do have, just with the history of how we have restructured segregation in this country and changed the way we talk about it. It doesn't. Nothing ever gets solved because we're always just reacting to the same beast in a different robe, and it's like, so at what point do we wisen up and say we're going to do the hard work of loving our neighbor in a way that can help transform the way these things are manifesting? Because this isn't working. This is not sustainable for much longer, and I think we're seeing the fruit of that now.
Yeah,
and so it's like, man, we got some loving to do in a very practical way.
Well, I've got good news for you because God wants to bless you in that.
Let me get my checkbook out.
The faith advisor to the current administration released a video, Passover season, God's divine appointment with you, that if you honor God during Passover, which begins April 12th at sundown, you will unlock divine and monetary rewards.
There's like 7 supernatural awards or
7
like
supernatural blessings. Yep. From Exodus 23. God will assign an angel to you. He will be an enemy to your enemies.
Yes.
He will give you prosperity. He will take sickness away from you, which, man, your family really needs.
Yeah.
He will give you long life, which I need. He will bring increase in inheritance, and he'll give a special year of blessing. Now, the problem, of course, is that God's not going to do that for free.
No.
You actually need to participate in this. And so she says, you're not doing this to get something, but you're doing it to honor God, realizing that you can get something for your special Passover offering of $1,000 or more as the Holy Spirit leads you. Oh, so it's so great. So it's just on the governmental side and then the faith advisor side, it's literally the same set of priorities, which make complete and utter sense. So we're going to interview Malcolm. He's just like Sarah was. These are people who are seeing this thing not from our basements when we're just reading articles on X or Instagram or whatever, but they're in the midst of like living all of this out. And we'll get back to cruciformity next week. I think next episode we have Gombus. So Mr. Cruciformity himself, he won most cruciform, I think, in 8th grade.
It's your book. I'm going to leave some jokes aside for that.
Yeah.
Little business things.
Oh.
which I had a couple, and now I'm remembering like two. One of them is we did invite a bunch of people, or we mentioned at the end of the podcast, someone even made a joke about it on Facebook about opening up our private Facebook group to everybody. Mike and I are always talking about how can we best create a platform. This podcast is run under the umbrella of being a home for the spiritually homeless, but we would like some practical elements to that as well. Places where people can lament and grieve or share or wrestle or, be joyous about whatever and have a safe community to do that. We don't want to be on Facebook, but I don't know that there is a better option. So in the meantime, we'll do that. And we said that the last episode, and I think almost 400 people joined it in the last week or so, which is wonderful. Awesome. But we don't.
Can we get rid of the other page? Can we get rid of? Did you put something on the other page? Wasn't there a public page?
Something on the other page, our public page that we don't really ever use, just saying, hey, it's because it's harder to have the conversations there.
Yeah.
But I don't know what people want or need out of online communities. We live in a weird world where we are connected digitally to each other, which has some great positives and also has some obvious drawbacks. But I would love to hear what people are looking for, how they want to have conversations. You're welcome to look that up too. It's just I think I put the link in the show notes, and I'll do it again today. It's just the VOXOLOGY community or something.
Tim, you're not a businessman. You're a business man.
Oh, you know what else, too? This is the last time I'm going to say anything about this. This will be the end of this conversation.
I don't believe it.
No, this is. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But this whole thing with The Chosen, when we got off the, when you and I got off the call, I tried to explain it more to you. And every time it comes up, I get so many messages. And I know we've run this into the dirt. This is a dead horse, and it's getting stinky. But what I said to you, to Mike off the air when we were done, was just like, when we did the episode on Midnight Mass, or when we had Nijay on, we were kind of talking about, hey, we could have a fun conversation about severance. These art forms that provoke curiosity and kind of provoke these conversations through a more poetic or side door. I think those are so fun and so interesting. Giving me an interpretation of Jesus that's coming from a specific person or a specific art form where they're plugging in gaps and they're creating things and stuff, I'm just not interested in that. And I think it's because it helps. I think a lot of the mess that we're in currently is that people have been telling us how to see Jesus for a long time and giving us different ways of doing that I think we've gotten weird. I mean, I think that's where we got Precious Moments, and that's where we got an Obi-Wan Kenobi Jesus, and
how dare you,
all that kind of stuff. So I don't know that I ever will watch it. And if I do, it'll be through a wonderfully skeptical lens, because I am emotionally affected by art. I had a conversation as being somebody who is off the charts with empathy. With my therapist, we're trying to talk about ways I can manage that in crowds and in social events and that kind of stuff. But we had a conversation about how art affects me and how I take on certain elements of whatever art I'm watching or participating in. And I never thought about it through an empathic lens. And she's like, no, this is very much the same thing. So when I watch something like that, I will be moved by it and I will be emotionally affected, which will cause me to have certain thoughts about it. And I think that's where some of the danger for me lies in it. So the end.
Well, we'll
enjoy
see.
Your programming.
We'll see. I'm not convinced it's over, ladies and gentlemen. All right, buddy. Well, thank you. We should let people just skip ahead to the interview.
Yes. It'll be time spent.
Oh, I love you. Thank you so much for that. Friends, see you later.
Countrymen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the VOXOLOGY podcast. Michael, Carl, Erre, Timothy, John Stafford, and Dr. Malcolm. What's your middle name, Malcolm? Can we ask?
Brian?
Brian? Dr.
Brian.
Malcolm Brian Foley. Welcome, sir.
It's good to be here.
It is good to be here because you're in Texas. I'm in Nashville. Tim's in California. So we've got everything bracketed. It's all taken care of. And Malcolm has written a book that is outstanding. It's called The Anti-Greed Gospel: Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism. And if you're checking on YouTube, he happens to have a copy. But my copy, if you're checking us out on YouTube, is way more dog-eared. That's at that point, why dog-ear anything?
Yeah,
if it's
just
all
dog-ear the whole book.
Yeah, it's really great.
Highlight the whole book.
Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism and how the church can create a new way forward. Dang. There are times when a title doesn't sell the book, and then there are times when it does. And this one is a doozy.
Brazos marketing.
Yes, let's go. What's your background? Where did you grow up? What was your family life like? Was this a Christian environment that you grew up in? Like, what was some of the, just if we're getting to know you?
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian household. I cannot remember there ever being a time when I didn't believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and that he died and was raised on my behalf. I grew up in predominantly Black Baptist churches, but basically grew up Baptist until I joined some Presbyterian churches and then left some of those spaces where like now I would basically identify as somebody who's basically like a Mennonite who baptizes babies.
There you go. That's funny.
The political theology and stuff is like all very, it's all very, very Mennonite. Yeah. But also I still do have an affection for Reformed theology, and a spirituality that leans Eastern Orthodox. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff kind of going on.
Who are some of your big Mennonite influences?
So really, it's that my favorite theologian is Antonio Gonzalez, who is a Spanish theologian, but I think he's part of a Mennonite community right now. But his book, God's Reign and the End of Empires, is one of my favorite books of all time. And if you've read that book, there's a lot of resonance with what I do in the anti-Greek gospel. But yeah, it's just a really, so just as a little thing on that book, it's a biblical theology that makes the argument that the Bible is just a series of anti-empire documents, not just anti-particular empires, but anti the very logic of empire.
Yes.
That what you're seeing in the scriptures is God's insistence on building on his people being his kingdom. That when he gathers a people that are supposed to live as a people ruled by God. And what you see throughout the scriptures is just people refusing to be ruled by God. And so then not only in the Son of God coming, but in the picture of the very end, the picture of the end is that the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of God, of our God and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever. And that is the story of the scriptures. The failure of the monarchy is the failure of the people to recognize that God's supposed to be their king, not some dude. Which is why like all of the kings are failures, except for Jesus. But anyway,
which makes sense of his message. Which makes sense of his message that the kingdom of God is at hand, not you're going to go to heaven when you die. That God is coming back to reclaim his people as king. I love that.
Stuff. It's great.
So when we look at empire,
yes,
one of the things that was so striking to me is how empire employs the concept of race.
Yes.
So to certain ends, I'd love for you to just start with unpacking what the concept of race is and how it's used.
Sure. Okay. So what I frame in the book is that race is part of what I call a demonic cycle of self-interest.
Right.
And that demonic cycle of self-interest begins in the desire to dominate and exploit each other. That is, we want money and we want power. But in order to get those things, we generally have to put other people in subordinate positions, which gives us an issue because people don't like being placed in subordinate positions. And so we have to keep them in those positions, and we employ violence to do so. Yeah. But most of us have consciences. And so we don't like to think about ourselves as just kind of waking up in the morning and thinking, hey, I'm really excited to dominate, exploit, and kill my neighbor. So we create narratives in order to tell ourselves that that's not what we're doing to each other. And the fundamental the historical role of race has been we create a category in order to tell ourselves, I'm not dominating, exploiting, and killing people. This is just the kind of person that God created them to be. So I don't have to think any further about it. This is also, though, like, this isn't the demonic cycle of self-interest is not just an account of racial capitalism as I frame in the book, but it's also just how evil works. And this is how, and this is something that became clear to me as we were preaching through the book of Revelation, because in Revelation 12 and 13, you get introduced to the counterfeit trinity of the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth, and you have the devil, you have the demonically empowered state with all of its military and economic might, and you have the propaganda machine that props it all up
in religious terms. Yeah,
exactly. That is, you have domination, exploitation, and lies. Like, those are just the three. Those are just the three weapons that Satan loves to use against the people of God. So I wanted to narrate that historically in the book through lynching, through racialized chattel slavery, but also just through, like, the way that the category of race works. That is, that it's fundamentally meant to justify and mystify modes of economic exploitation.
See, that you said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said something that blew my mind. And again, I grew up in Ohio. Okay. So small town Ohio.
Yeah.
Race was just, all race meant was color of skin. And so that's all it meant. And one of the things that you said is that the profit came before concepts of race. Can you zero in on a bit of that? Maybe I interrupted you and that's where you were going, but that was news.
Yeah. So historically, the only reason why we think that that color of skin has meaning beyond color of skin is because when the Portuguese travel to Africa, witness chattel slavery, and decide to get involved, they don't get involved because they're racist. Like, they get involved because they have markets they want to expand, and then and this is it's a really cheap source of labor, and so then as they have to justify that both to themselves and to the Pope, and they're looking for, like, how can we tell ourselves that this is okay? We're like, well, they're different. They're savages that we've got to civilize. They're heathens that we've got to Christianize, and all of that is visible in their blackness. And so those narratives start to kind of gain social power because they're used specifically to justify profit. And telling those stories over and over again just gets naturalized in people's minds so that it sounds reasonable. When its entire purpose was just, no, like, we're making a lot of money and we want to continue making a whole bunch of money.
Right. So because my view of race was literally skin deep. I mean, it made movements like Promise Keepers or things that concern themselves with racial reconciliation, where you would just hug somebody, say you're sorry,
hugs
whatever.
I'm a big fan of hugs.
No, hugs are great. But to your point, that doesn't do anything to address the soil from which racism springs, and that soil is greed.
Yep.
In the book, and so if you had to articulate, because one thing that I've seen in my heart and in the Christian community is, yes, okay, yep, we're all made in the image of God, fantastic, everyone's deserving of honor and worth. Yeah. You're arguing that doesn't address the core issue. What core issue does it miss?
So, what I want to argue is that America's history of race and racism is really just a proxy battle of a cosmic war.
Oh, now we're cooking in Revelation, Malcolm. Wow.
And the combatants in this cosmic war were named by Jesus in Matthew 6:24.
Yes.
He says, you cannot serve two masters. You will either love one and hate the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. And it's really interesting to me that he could have chosen any other thing to be this kind of contrary master to the Lord. And mammon is just the Aramaic word for riches and money. And it's fascinating that he chooses that he chooses money. And so one of the things I want to do in the book, and really this is like bled into the rest of my ministry and preaching, is like, I think Jesus is right. And so like, what does that really mean? Like if we were to play this, like if we were to play this out, if we were to play out the fact that Jesus is essentially saying there are two entities vying for your allegiance, essentially, and it's God and money. Like there are two masters that want you, two folks who want to be able to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Two folks who want you to follow them. And those two are the Lord, who actually loves you, and Mammon, who doesn't care about you, but still wants you to do what it says, wants you to live in constant anxiety and fear and worry, and so then to worship it through your greed, which is not just the desire to acquire, but it's also just the desire to hoard and to keep for yourself, because you think that the only way for you to survive is if you cling more tightly to what you think you have. All those things are kind of the base impulses of greed, and that's essentially the mother that feeds the category of race and the mobilization of racism through this continual umbilical cord. And so my thing is, like, if you want to deal with the issues of race and racism, deal with what feeds it, because the fact of the matter is that greed also has other children. And so I want to deal with all of them.
Yeah. Well, and I think another equally damaging but opposite error is the I don't see color. Then it's the colorblindness sort of modality that you critique. And so here's another softball to say, and what does that approach miss?
Yeah. So one of the things, because I also want to be charitable with the folks who affirm colorblindness, because what they really want to say is that they don't they kind of don't discriminate on the basis of race and skin color and stuff like that, which is what, like, I mean, I want that. That's a good thing, but I don't want us to be unaware of the fact that we still live in a racialized society where race does affect people's opportunities, outcomes, and all those kinds of things, because it's a structure that's meant for economic exploitation. And so if you're blind to those realities, then you're also there's just the fact that, like, when is blindness ever a goal? Ever? Like, we want to be able to see and be able to see clearly. And one of the things that we have to be able to see clearly is the way that these categories are fundamentally used to harm people. And so the argument of the book, and this is probably one of the most controversial elements of it, is that, like, I want to see race evacuated of its power. This is not done away with us just, like, acting like it doesn't exist. No. We have to recognize that. Recognize the it's a lie, which I want to press very, very strongly. But it's a lie that has material effects on people. And so for me to deal with that lie, I have to not only say that it's untrue, but I have to form communities where it does not have where it doesn't have the power that it has in other spaces. And so it needs to be actively defanged, not just like, oh, well, like, the snake isn't here. No, like, that's not.
You have a great line. And Tim and I were just talking about how the worst interviewers quote your book back to you, but that's what I'm going to do right now. It is best to neither ignore nor celebrate race. It must be defanged. Which is so interesting because, again, in my Christian worldview, it's only been one of those two options. Either it's not there, or we celebrate it and make a bigger category of it than it should be. You're arguing that racial justice cannot be separated from economic justice.
Correct.
Yes. Now so all the good evangelicals, or at least a lot of them, are on board till this point, because then it's like,
this is the main point.
Right. Exactly. Because it's like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, greed is the root of all evil and love of money. And of course, it makes sense that we would justify slavery this way. But what does economic justice look like, Mr. Foley?
Yeah. Well, and this is, part of what I'm also doing is I'm saying, hey, race is a category of political economy, not primarily identity. The identity stuff kind of comes later. It begins, and most of its power is in the political economic work that it does. But with the racial justice and economic justice thing, what I also want to remind people that this is also what Martin Luther King Jr. was really explicit about, especially in the last few years of his life, where he would say that the triple evils are racism, militarism, and materialism, and you can't deal with one without dealing with all three. And I think about the March on Washington, which we just kind of remember as the March on Washington, when its full title is the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Like throughout the long civil rights struggle, there's always been this recognition that racial justice and economic justice are two sides of the same coin. But here's a historical point that I think most people haven't necessarily reckoned with. So in the last few years of the civil rights movement, as we're seeing progress in specifically desegregation, a number of the leaders of the civil rights movement get together, and they're thinking about kind of what the next steps in the movement are gonna be. And there's and one of the points of conversation is basically, okay, we're seeing all this progress with the desegregation stuff, but we have an economic agenda that we know that the only way for actual equality to happen is if this economic agenda happens. So you have the freedom agenda, like others, the freedom budget. But you have folks like A. Philip Randolph, Baird, Rustin, King, others who are like, hey, there's an economic agenda that's really important to this. But that's also much more controversial. Like, it's going to be more controversial with the general public. So do we lean into the identity race stuff and just focus on the desegregation stuff, because that's where we're seeing a lot of progress? Or do we lean into the more radical economic stuff that we know is the only way that equality is actually going to take place? They chose the former. And so as we think back on the civil rights movement, we think about it primarily in terms of integration, desegregation, all that stuff. When really a number of the leaders were very clear about the fact that actually, like, it's the economic stuff that in a sense really matters, because like if we deal with that, then we're going to deal with some of this other stuff too.
And one of the huge examples you give in the book is that of lynching. I mean, which is one of the most horrific chapters in American history. Yeah. And the fact that lynching, it began to dissipate, not because people grew a conscience, but rather it had economic consequences, which is insane.
I know, right?
Insane. Totally. And that whole idea that as soon as it begins to cost white people something, they begin to reevaluate their behavior.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
the quote I love from Ida B. Wells, where she says the appeals that the white man's dollar is his God, and the appeal to the white man's pocket has ever been more effectual than all the appeals ever made to his conscience.
Yes. So the Great Migration of workers out of the South into the North. And it became, and I'm just saying back to you things that you've said, but I'm saying them because this is, it has really important implications that if people just hear the implications and they don't get the story, then they're just going to call the implications something else. They're going to dismiss the implications. But if you understand the story and the sophistication of the argument being made, then the implications naturally follow. To build communities of economic justice is one of the most important, if not the most important way to address racism in our country. And that, that's a doozy.
I got to walk you through the journey of the book to get you there, where you're like, it's obvious. Yes.
Well, and that's where you're Mennonite. Sky, you just had an interview with Sky. Sky and I go back and forth. I'm an Anabaptist to the core about the job of the church is to be the church and to embody what it wants to see in culture. And Sky's constantly saying, no, well, we've got to also agitate culture and advocate, of course. But one of the things that you point out that is very, I think, significant is that the church does not see itself, at least in my experience, in any sort of political, economic terms. The church is just another nonprofit vying for our consumer dollars. When you talk about economic justice, when it comes to a church community, what does that look like?
So I think the church needs to understand the fact that one of our primary witnesses to the world is supposed to be our economic witness. And that is indicated to us in Acts 2. So immediately after the Holy Spirit descends on the people of God, they're marked by 4 things. And every church is just, I think every church is supposed to be marked by these 4 things. And those 4 things are devotion to the apostles' teaching, prayer, the breaking of bread, the eating together, and the fellowship. And koinonia, fellowship, it's variably translated fellowship, sharing, participation. But the question is like, what are we sharing? And in that text, they're sharing their material goods.
Yeah.
In Acts 4, we're told that God's grace was so powerfully at work among them that there were no needy people in their midst because they're sharing because they're sharing their goods with one another. And one of the primary witnesses of the church is that we are people who see all of our resources as fundamentally meant to be shared. And that is a significant economic witness in the midst of neoliberal capitalism that tells us that everything I have is something that I worked for, and thus I have the right to do whatever I want with it because that's what really matters. And God, and we are, and we're, but we're reminded by the Lord, no, like everything you have is something I gave you. Therefore, it's meant for my glory and for the care of, my creation. And so that when people see communities that actually live by that logic, they're going to be surprised by it as they would in any era in human history. Because greed is just so fundamental to the way that we are generally told to think about our resources. Right. They're mine, and they're meant for me to do whatever I want with them. And God's like, no, they're not yours. They're mine. I've chosen to give them to you, but they're ultimately meant for my purposes.
That's right.
And we're supposed to be the people who actually apply that as deeply as possible.
Right. Which is interesting. You use the word solidarity instead of generosity or instead of philanthropy.
Yes.
Because and what's the difference in your mind?
Yeah. So generosity can very easily bleed into paternalism.
Yes.
Where I'm the generous one, and you are the receiver. And look at me and how great I am for deigning to lower myself to your level. But I'll only do that for a minute, and then I'll go back to like where I'm used to being. And that is specifically undermined by the incarnation, by the way that Christ has given himself to us, that he has chosen to give up the amount that he has given up because he loves us, but also to share all of it with us, even his very throne. When this became clear to me, I think this was a life-changing moment in my life a few months ago, when I was preaching Revelation 3. Specifically the end of Revelation 3, when Christ is talking to the church at Laodicea, and this is the church that's lukewarm. I know your works; you're neither hot nor cold. Because you're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to vomit you out of my mouth. Why is he about to vomit you out of his mouth? Because you say that you're rich and you need nothing, but I know that you're wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. But at the end of that, in Revelation 3:21, Jesus says, "To the one who overcomes, I will give to him the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and sat with my Father on his throne.
Come on,
which
now.
which is to say that while like the image at the end of Revelation and in Daniel 7 could be so the image of the saints ruling alongside Christ in the new heavens and new earth, you might imagine that that's like, well, Jesus gets the big chair, we get like little ones hang out around him, which would be awesome. Like that would be awesome. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, hey, there's the chair on which like only me and my Father sit. You're gonna be there with us on that chair. Like that's what union with Christ looks like. It's a union with him to the extent that he shares everything that he has with us. This is why the picture of deification that comes out of Eastern Orthodox circles is the most compelling vision of Christian salvation to me, because what it's indicating is that God is calling us to a relationship with himself that is deeper than anything that we could ever imagine, such that the only way for us to get closer to the Lord would be for us to be members of the Trinity. Like that's that's the only way for it to get any better. And we can't even imagine, like it is so far beyond what we can imagine. But this is also why he gets nauseous with the church at Laodicea, because he's like, y'all are preoccupied with material wealth, political power, cultural influence, whatever. Don't you have any idea what I've prepared for you? Why would you? Why are you so distracted by that little stuff? And so one of the things that I also want to do is just kind of reorient the people of God toward like what God has actually prepared for them. And also for them to keep in mind, like that then ought to shape the way that you think about power and money and resources now. Like they're fundamentally meant to be shared, because the one whom you claim to be united to has seen everything that he has as meant to be shared, even with you. Why you hold so tightly to all the little stuff you got?
No, that's it. And that, the thing that you're not saying here, but you argue, is that this is the vision from Genesis 1 on.
It's the whole thing.
The whole, like Torah is economics. Church is economics. Revelation ends in economic justice. So this isn't like a little bitty slice of the pie here.
I mean, the book says how the church can create a new way forward, but this is also the old, like this is the old way forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. Tim, I see your face. I hear the wheels.
I don't even know. I have so many questions. Yesterday in class, we were reading through, I teach at a Christian university. And so, as we talk through current event kind of things, and we'll talk through DEI standards getting revoked, and we'll break that acronym down to the words and just be like, are any of these words negative words? But it's beyond like the definition, like how... Or we'll talk about the history. Like they read the new Jim Crow, or an excerpt from it last on Wednesday, and the things that provokes in conversation, the way that we have evolve or change segregation to fit into different modes that make more that can kind of take some of the thorns off of it, in at least the vocabulary. To watch that economically, right? Or, why did we never learn about like the Tulsa Massacre very often, and to talk about Black businesses and economics of that? So all that, like when you talk about defanging these conversations within the church, like to a layman level, to an everyday congregate, non-academic level, like what does that look like? Like how do we, because we do have these conversations where we will like the colorblindness or different things where people are leaning into something they think is taking some of the fire out of racial, just how do we cultivate this? How do we change the conversation? I guess, how do we open the imagination? Like you just said, like this is not the new conversation. This is the original conversation. Yeah. So how do you guys think we manifest that amongst our peers together to see this as a more holistic conversation rather than just like another turn in the same circle that we keep going around and around in?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is I hope that people will, I think with the urgency of the message that I'm trying to offer, I hope people recognize that like that greed is actually it's actually one of the most dangerous things that the church needs to be prepared to struggle against. So it's why another way that I summarize the book is that, like, I want to pry the claws of mammon out of the hearts and minds of the people of God, because we are often blinded to the fact that love framed in the scriptures is always material. And so if we're going to say that we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, the question is going to be, well, like, how does that materially show up? And whenever Christ says the, like, really scary stuff that Jesus says, so, like, for example, like when he talks to the folks in, I think it's Matthew 7, who say, well, didn't we do all this stuff on your behalf? And he's like, I don't know you, because, like, you doing all the miraculous stuff, I mean, like, that's cool, but that's not obedience to me. Or at the end of Matthew 7, when we talk about the person who built their house on the rock or building their house on sand, that what that comes down to is whether you were actually obedient to Christ in the things that he called you to do. And one of the primary things is supposed to be specifically material care for the needy. As another point, in Luke 16, when he tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, when Moses what Abraham tells the rich man at the very end of that parable, because the rich man is like, can maybe you could send Lazarus back to, like, warn my brothers that, like, that this is what happens when you do this stuff. And Abraham's like, look, they've got Moses and the prophets. If they're not going to listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't listen to even somebody who gets up from the dead. Sorry, bro. Like, that's But all that's to say, like, these things are actually obvious. Like, this is one of the things I also want to frame the book. Like, I'm not telling us to do ridiculous things that actually you've never heard before. You've just never been actually encouraged to actually live in this way before. You've been given all of these resources to avoid the things that Jesus has said, to say that, well, Jesus didn't really mean all these things. I'm just like, look, just listen to the Lord when he tells you to do stuff, and then, like, do those things.
The end.
There we go.
Yeah. The rest is commentary.
That's it. But there are I think of two kind of practical encouragements that come out of this, and one is that we have to kind of train folks to be able to ask for help, because we're in a society and an economy that encourages us to think about self-sufficiency in all things, and then if I'm in trouble, there's something I need to do to be able to get myself out of trouble, as opposed to being reminded that actually God has called a people to come alongside me, so that, like, so that, like, I'm not the only one who cares about me and my family. Like, I'm connected to a community of people who care. But it starts with asking for help and giving others opportunities to love you. And then paired with that, we've got to cultivate habits of sharing, habits of seeing the things that we have as things that are meant to be shared. I mean, a lot of this is in what was described by many as the discipline of simplicity, that you seek to live a more simple life so that you can share, because you realize that, hey, the Lord is going to provide me with everything that I need, insofar as I have excess. Like, that's meant to meet the needs of others. That's I think for many people a paradigm shifting way to think about their resources. But, like, that's just the way the Bible, it's the way Christ calls us to. So I feel like we should do it. Yeah, it's hard for me too, and, like, I don't want to say this like I'm the one doing it perfectly or whatever. I've been deeply convicted by the words of Jesus, and so I'm like, well, if I'm going to feel this way, I want all y'all to feel this way too, so we can figure this out together.
That's right.
It's a dramatic it's like a dramatic restructuring of how you see almost everything. Yeah, we keep having conversations about. I read an article to my students about how like when you're about to die, your body kicks into overdrive to keep you alive. Like you're built. So we were talking about how our baseline operating system is self-preservation.
Yeah.
And how does that eke out into other facets of our lives, or how we see the world, or how we interact with other people? And the example you gave of calling generosity paternalism is I'm going to chew on that one for a minute. Like there's so much packed into that mode of posturing that is pretty profound and has a lot of implications too. It's a very three-dimensional idea.
Yeah. Yep.
Because because the other thing is like you can have greedy, generous people.
Totally, absolutely, yeah.
And you can have very generous poor people.
Yeah.
I mean that's the categories. I'd love to talk about what's happening in our culture.
Ooh.
Malcolm, and because we were just lamenting in our last episode. I mean, we were just going through all of the ways that contributions of Black people, of women, of other people of color are being systemically sort of either hidden or removed. They're being obscured or removed. And then you have the DEI thing that is happening. There was a big news today. University of Michigan shut down their DEI department after millions and millions of dollars spent in those directions. How I would I guess from somebody who is mostly ignorant, were DEI programs doing what they claimed to do?
Yeah.
Because I understand. I mean, that was part of the economic justice, was saying, hey, there are systemic exclusions that should be happening or that are happening. So there should be systemic inclusions that should be happening.
Yeah.
And then how, as a Black man, do you stay sane and as an historian who's seen the same patterns over and over and over again? How do you stay sane in the midst of all of this? So I mean, this is more of just, hey, how are you seeing these things?
Well, and also, I mean, diversity and equity stuff is also in my job description in the work I do at Baylor. So it's like I'm under, there's a lot of stuff going on. So
you're the president for equity and campus engagement.
I'm special advisor to the president for equity and campus engagement. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
So I think about these things on occasion. So there are one of the ways that the anti-diversity, equity, inclusion stuff has been framed is that, and this goes back to the document in 2023 that the Manhattan Institute put out, which was titled "Abolish DEI Bureaucracies and Restore Colorblind Equality to Public Universities," which is funny in its own right, because restoring colorblind equality suggests that there was colorblind equality that we are getting back to, which is a little bit historically hilarious. But the claim is that all of these offices in universities around the country are really just ideological, like they're just bastions of ideology, where they're just doing a bunch of ideological policing. And there are probably like there are some of these programs that do that, where like where the idea is like we want to kind of shame you into thinking particular things or whatever. Some people do some people do that. But the vast majority of these spaces are just kind of invested in building more just and equitable institutions, in recognizing the fact that, especially with schools that like recently desegregated and stuff, that like you just changing the policy to allow somebody into a space doesn't actually welcome them into that space, especially when an institution has been created without any thought for, like, specifically in a way that excludes particular people.
Yeah.
Once that inclusion takes place, like you're not done just by saying, oh, like you can come through the door. Like people will walk through the door and find themselves in a space that was not only never created for them, but like never cared about them. And so it takes intentional takes intentional work to shape, especially university cultures, in such a way that that actually does support everybody. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the points of conflict for some folks who are in, for example, chief diversity officer roles, is that there can be the assumption of them that, especially if they're Black or Latino folks in those roles, the idea is, oh, well, this person is just there to serve this particular community. Mm-hmm. And all of my other colleagues have told me that they constantly need to reinforce, no, like, I'm here for everybody, because it's actually for everyone's benefit that everyone is served. But that also requires us to be aware of the ways in which some folks were systematically excluded from spaces, which then requires us to actually respond to those particular wounds. And so, but what we're seeing through kind of executive order and stuff like that is just it's essentially the institutionalization of colorblindness. It's just like, no, actually, like, race doesn't and shouldn't matter. So stop any particular interventions.
Right.
And I'm like, it's just unwise. There are wounds you don't deal with. My favorite quote from Malcolm X, who I'm named after. There's a reporter who asks him, like, whether he's seen progress. It's 1965, and he says no. I haven't seen progress. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, that's not progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made. Oh, and wow. and some folks haven't even begun to pull the knife out. Some won't even admit that the knife is there.
Right.
And so if we're going to be a people who are actively invested in progress, it has to involve the healing of wounds. And that means that we have to see those wounds.
Yeah, I mean, that's step one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just to state the obvious, it's like, admitting the wound is there is like kind of how it begins. I know.
Step one.
So I guess what I'm feeling, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, I don't feel like it's instituting colorblindness. I think it's privileging whiteness.
Yeah.
And punishing. And now I mean, I have no basis to have anything other than an opinion on this, but that's what it feels like. Is that so? When you say they're instituting colorblindness, that you're putting the best, you're putting their spin on it.
I am, but
right.
but also, but it's also because, like, I really don't think that what lies at the root of all of this is like some elaborate, like some scheme of white supremacy. Just because, like, I think it just goes fundamentally down to self-interest. Mm-hmm. I don't think, so for example, with the president, I don't think he cares too much about, like, being white. I think he just wants money and power.
Yeah.
And if there are people who are going to surround him who are like, this is how you get money and power, you cater to these people and use this language and all that kind of stuff, he's like, all right, cool, let's do that. I think it just fundamentally comes down to self-interest, because this goes back to my thesis. Even the creation of whiteness is a smokescreen. It's that this is an opportunity for folks to justify their own wealth and power. Whiteness only has value insofar as it gives me wealth and power. If it didn't give me those things, I wouldn't fight for it, because there would be nothing to fight for. It's just so it's why I always want to draw now, especially when I have conversations about race. I always want to draw it back to the material, because the way that we think about ourselves and stuff like that, like all of that, we do those things for a particular reason. So, like, for example, as one other example, you got people talking about people voting against their economic interests. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I say in response to that is that, like, I don't think anybody ever votes against, like, I don't think anybody ever acts against their own interest. I think they may be deceived into thinking that what serves their interest is something else. But, like, everybody, all the things that you do, you choose to do because they benefit you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it's just that sometimes if you have a powerful enough propaganda machine that tells you, hey, like, this is going to lead to significant benefit for you. If you're deceived into that camp, then then those are the decisions that you'll make. So when people are told, this is an Oliver Cromwell Cox line that I use in the book, but he says that those who teach and finance race prejudice are by no means as by no means as much fools as those who believe and practice it. Which is to say that, like, you like it's just wow. Like, there are people who, like, the people who teach and finance it are, like, actually making money off of it. But then you got a bunch of people who just believe it, where it doesn't actually do them any good, but they're told that it does.
Yeah.
And so they do it like that. Like, so that like that's the other element of it.
It's Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
Who is more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?
Yeah. Wow. See?
Yeah.
Boom.
Have you even watched Star Wars, Malcolm?
There it is.
Are you like you were? You were boy. You watched the prequels, right? You were a kid when the prequels were out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Speaking of, sorry to end on that note. Where, if people want more, obviously buy the book, but where can people track you online? I mean, are your sermons online?
They
Do
are.
You have I mean, this guy, let me just say, as on a scale of, like, Tim being a 10 in the handsomeness and Mike being a 1, Malcolm is probably a 27.
I appreciate
people.
I need to come on this podcast more often.
People just want to see the goodness that is your face. Like, where do we go?
So my church is called Mosaic Waco. We're in Waco, Texas, but all of our sermons and stuff are online.
Love that.
I'm still on Twitter for now. We'll see how much longer that lasts. Yeah. But also on Threads at RevDocMalc. Also Instagram at the same name, and then Blue Sky at Malcolm B Foley.
Nice. Which is Brian. We learned today it was Brian.
There you go.
That's it.
There you go.
Malcolm, man, what a joy. Thank you for writing this. Thank you for spending some time with us today. It's really a big deal. Thank you. My friend, amazing. You have the most infectious laugh. What a delight. What a delight. I mean, you know this, Malcolm. I mean, there are some interviews that are really hard.
Sure.
And then there's you. And then it's just joy. So
should I send people to anywhere in particular to buy the book?
I think they'll get the best price at the Brazos website.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's the place to go.
All right.
Yeah, Brazos is kind of the coolest. It used to be Zondervan, not anymore. Brazos kind of has the biggest balls in the industry right now.
Well, we're trying to avoid Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All of them.
So.
Yeah.
Cook all of them.
Bookshop, because I think the price at Bookshop is it's not as good as the Brazos price, because at Brazos you get it like 30% off. So
okay,
awesome. Hey, have a great rest of your day. Enjoy
Thanks.
your sermon.
You too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great to meet you, man.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks for your time today.
Anytime you want me to come back, I'll come back.
Well, I'll tell you, I was actually going to approach Tim. Like, you're the kind of person I'd love to have, even if there's not something specific that we're asking people to buy or whatever. Yeah. I just think, man, we need more sets of eyes on some of the things that are happening in the world. So
however I can be of assistance.
If you're open to that, fantastic.
Well, I think this conversation too has gotten even more ripe in the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. So
you think?
Oh, well, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. So after having read the book, let's say I want to do a second one. Yeah. What would you want out of that? What would you want out of a second book?
Oh, okay. I'd want 2 or 3 different things. Number one, I would want you to go through systematically and paint that central to God's conception of shalom as economic justice, and start in Genesis with blessing, end in Revelation, and hit Torah, hit prophets. Like we've been doing a series going through Paul, and all of the ways that ethnicity matters to Paul, and what the gospel's doing is healing, and restoring shalom. So I'd love the thing I often get pushback on, that you know damn well better than I do, is that, hey, this is all social gospel Marxist stuff, and it's not the heart of God. And you touch on that with love. But man, there's some stuff to plumb.
Walter Brueggemann does that in a book called Money and Possessions, where he just goes through the whole Bible and totally. Just like is like, actually the Bible is about money and possessions.
Yeah.
But it's a great book.
But I do think the way you tie that into the concept of race is the unique contribution that you would make to that.
Yeah.
The second thing I would want is I'd want you to engage with whatever the pushback that you've been hearing is, particularly if there are some from other African-American historians or theologians.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I'd love for you to do is to paint more specific pictures of how certain communities inhabit economic justice. So sharing, but usually that happens through benevolence. So I give to my church. Right. The church takes 90% of its budget for itself. 10% goes to missions. Of that 10%, 2% goes to benevolence. So there's no concept there of sharing. Right? Except give to church. And that's obviously in church's vested interest to do that. So I know that's way too specific an answer that you probably wanted, but
no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I mean, this is the stuff that I talk like when I talk at churches and they ask the question like that's like, I mean, that's what I talk about.
I would want for me as a pastor of maybe a 700 person church that cares about this issue deeply, but still operates in the hangover of old conceptions of racial reconciliation. Almost a manual on practical steps, supporting Black-owned businesses. If somebody is hitting us up for benevolence, having benevolence policies that take into account much bigger factors than just how much you're making, and whatever. I mean, whatever it is, my friend, because you're pastoring in a church, you're just in a really unique spot to address those things, and it is worthy of a sequel. So I'm glad you're already thinking that direction.
Cool, great. That's good stuff. Tim, you got any thoughts?
I'm so interested. Like I said, we've been having a little of these conversations, but my students are baked in this old rhetoric, from whether it is through half-baked reconciliatory ideas, or like really, really white Protestant. This is actually, DEI is actually racist. Here's why. So there's a large spectrum there, but like going through the history of going from slavery to segregation to redlining to GI bills to all that kind of stuff that we've instituted for a long time now. Like how do you reverse engineer a population on that stuff? That's the stuff I'm always trying to have conversations with my students. Like, if not this, then what? If you guys are going to push back on these ideas, then how do you see a generational systemic thing where it's not just like, we're not just talking about this year or this century. We're talking about a long lineage of us restructuring things to do what you're saying, to for self-interest and self whatever. So it's like, it's a daunting conversation, but I want to like give my students the ability to posture themselves in a way that they can be a positive part of the conversation, or at least acknowledge it, like at the very least.
Well, I will say this does not come out of my mouth often, but or ever. But there is a point at which Margaret Thatcher was right when she in an interview in 1981, because as dangerous as specifically the popularizing of neoliberal capitalism was, in 1981 she gave an interview where she said, you know, for the last 30 years, the world's been moving towards a collectivist society, and that's bad. It needs to move towards a more personal society. And then she says at the end of this interview, she says, economics is the method, but the goal is to change the soul. And and it has worked. Like, that particular political economy is like, it's a cultural project that has changed the way that we see each other and the way that we see ourselves. Yeah. And this is also why I want to remind people that, like, hey, the gospel of Jesus Christ is a political economy. Like, it's a different account. It's a different account of power and a different account of resources.
We didn't get into any of that. I know.
So that's what I'm all about. So
yeah.
Well, thanks, y'all.
Man.
Yeah, good stuff.
This is really great. Thank you, Malcolm, so much. What a joy to meet you today.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day, man.